Welcome to Thinking Deeper by 6-7.
Thanks for having me. I'm really looking forward to this one.
So today we're exploring basically the ultimate metaphysical heavyweight clash. We're talking God versus Satan and that huge philosophical battleground of atheism versus faith.
Right, it's a massive topic.
It really is. We're breaking down this incredibly fascinating debate between devout Christians and modern non-theistic Satanists over who actually represents true freedom.
Which is a lot more complicated than it sounds.
Oh, absolutely. We're going to journey from the really deep philosophical questions of morality and the problem of evil straight into the ancient literal valley of hell. And then finally, we'll look at physical manifestations of the demonic.
Yeah, everything from modern exorcisms to bizarre folklore like the Jersey Devil.
Exactly. It's going to be a wild ride. Oh, and real quick, if you like my channel, please subscribe and hit the like button. So setting up the mission here, what are we really looking at today?
Well, our mission for this deep dive is to, impartially unpack these very diverse sources. We've got a modern debate transcript, some historical documentary.
Really varied stuff.
Yeah, and we're using them to understand how humanity wrestles with these concepts of absolute authority, rebellion, and, well, the physical presence of evil.
Right, because when you look at the core question from our sources, it all starts with this idea of freedom. Does God or Satan represent true freedom?
And that establishes two wildly opposing worldviews.
Completely opposing. I mean, let's start with the Satanist perspective, because it's probably not what most people think of, right?
No, not at all. Modern Satanism is largely what they call a post-atheistic movement.
So they don't actually believe in a literal guy with horns and a pitchfork.
Exactly. They don't believe in a literal Satan. They just use him as the ultimate symbol of rebellion against tyranny.
Oh, like a literary figure.
Right. They view him sort of like Prometheus, from Greek mythology, the guy who stole fire from the gods to give humanity knowledge.
Bringing the forbidden knowledge to the people.
Precisely. So to them, freedom means bodily autonomy. It means unapologetic self-love.
And taking personal responsibility.
Yes, making full responsibility for yourself without relying on any sort of higher power to swoop in and save you.
Okay, so that's the secular side. But the Christian perspective in the debate, they look at that entirely differently. They look at that famous occult phrase, do what thou wilt.
Right, the Aleister Crowley thing.
Yeah, that phrase. Christians view that not as freedom, but as a direct path to bondage.
Which is a total flip.
It's a complete flip. They argue that true freedom is actually being saved from our own, self-destructive, sinful nature. They don't see God's rules as a cage at all.
They see them as protection.
Exactly. It's like, okay, imagine a parent setting up a sturdy fence right at the edge of a steep cliff.
Right.
If you're a toddler, you might look at that fence and think, oh, this is restricting my freedom to run wherever I want.
Because you just want to play.
Yeah, but the parent knows that the fence is actually protecting your life. So the restriction is what allows you to survive and actually be free in the long run.
That's a really good analogy.
But I do have to push back a little on the expert speaker side of the secular argument here.
Sure, go ahead.
If Satanism is genuinely just about autonomy and human empathy, why use such an adversarial label? I mean, why not just be a secular humanist or a regular atheist? Why dress it all up in the aesthetic of the ultimate villain?
Well, what's fascinating here is how they view the limits of pure atheism. Atheism was great at breaking down old, rigid systems.
Right, the whole new atheism wave a couple decades ago.
Exactly. It tore down those structures, but it left a huge void.
Oh, like a cultural vacuum.
Yes. People still inherently need symbols. We are social creatures. We need community. We need ritual. Pure rational atheism doesn't give you a shared narrative or, holidays to celebrate together.
So they basically co-opted the romanticized literary Satan to fill that gap.
Yeah, they adopted him as their banner because it provides that countercultural identity and the ritual that people were craving.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because if you have total freedom to choose, how do we actually know what is good or evil? Where does our moral compass even come from without a divine blueprint?
That is the big question. And the Christian debaters argue for a theistic standard. They say God is the unchanging, objective standard of morality.
Meaning right and wrong are baked into the universe.
Right. And they argue that without God, morality is just personal opinion. If right and wrong are just social constructs, then disliking murder is really just as subjective as...
Disliking pizza.
Exactly. Disliking pizza or the color yellow is just a preference.
But the Satanists have a completely different standard. They derive their morality from human empathy, from culture.
Yeah. Evolutionary biology, basically.
Right, the biological desire to see everyone in your tribe fed and warm. They actively embrace living in the gray rather than having these rigid black and white rules from an ancient text.
Which sounds very compassionate, but it leads into the problem of evil. And this is where the debate got incredibly heavy.
It really did. There was this deeply emotional moment from the sources. One of the Satanist representatives shared that his own son was murdered.
Yeah, just an unimaginable tragedy.
And he stated that this horror proved to him that the universe is just cold. It's indifferent. There is no ultimate loving architect behind the scenes, because if there were, that wouldn't happen to an innocent kid.
It's a profound reaction to grief.
But the Christians countered that by saying that evil stems from human free will. And they didn't dismiss his pain at all, but they pointed out that in their belief, God shares in that exact pain.
Because God also lost his own son to a brutal execution.
Right. And because of that, God offers ultimate justice and mercy in the end, even if we don't see it now.
It's two completely different ways of trying to survive the cruelty of the world.
But, going back to the secular idea of empathy, if morality comes purely from human empathy and societal consensus, what happens when an entire society collectively decides on something horrific?
Oh, history's full of examples of that.
If the only standard is what the culture agrees on, and the culture agrees that doing something unspeakably evil is actually a good thing, you have no objective grounding to tell them they're wrong.
Which connects directly to this really famous philosophical trap called the Platonic dilemma, or the Euthyphro dilemma.
Oh, right, the one about where goodness comes from.
Yes. It asks, is something good because God says so, or does good exist entirely outside of God?
And either answer kind of boxes you in.
Completely. Because if it's just good because God says so, it's arbitrary. But if it's inherently good, then God isn't the ultimate source of goodness.
It's a total paradox.
Yeah.
And speaking of philosophical dilemmas, this transitions us perfectly from the debate over evil to the ultimate destination of evil. We're talking about hell.
Yeah, how a literal trash dump became the symbol for eternal torment.
Wait, I still can't get over that detail from the sources, but first, let's establish the modern views. Satanists see hell as just a metaphor, right?
Purely a symbol.
Yeah.
A fictional place invented to punish people who break, daddy's rules.
Right. A scare tactic. And Christians...
Christians in the debate were actually somewhat divided on the specifics.
Oh, really? I thought it was just universal fire and brimstone.
Some do view it as a literal lake of fire. But others point out these historical translation nuances, words like Sheol, Tartarus, and Gehenna. They agree it's a real state of separation from God, but maybe not a cartoonish torture chamber.
But that word Gehenna, that brings us to the historical documentaries we looked at. Because Gehenna traces back to a literal physical location.
Yes. Just outside the ancient walls of Jerusalem, there is a physical place called the Valley of Hinnom.
Which is the root word for Gehenna.
Exactly. And the history of this valley is horrifying.
Yeah.
Ancient Canaanite people literally sacrificed their own children there.
Oh my God.
Yeah, pits of fire. They did it to appease these dark spiritual entities, basically to ensure their crops would grow.
So they were trading human lives for agricultural success.
That was the belief. It was a place of constant smoke, fire, and unimaginable human misery.
And it later became the city's literal garbage dump, right?
Yeah.
Where they burned trash and criminals' bodies so it wouldn't spread disease.
Right, so the fires were always burning.
It's so wild to me. Like, we have Dante's Inferno, which paints this picture of psychological torment creating a hell in your own mind. But then you have this physical horror of the ancient Valley of Hinnom. Isn't it just crazy that the entire concept of an eternal underworld is actually based on a literal GPS coordinate, a piece of dirt where ancient humans did unspeakable things?
It really grounds the theology in something visceral. The fear of eternal damnation has historically kept populations in line, absolutely. But the root of that fear isn't just a fairy tale. It stems from actual historical trauma and literal places of extreme darkness.
Okay, so if hell actually has a geographical origin story, does the demonic have physical manifestations today?
That's a huge shift from the theoretical to claims of tangible physical evil.
Right, because both the Christians in the modern debate and the documentary sources talk heavily about the physical reality of demons.
Specifically through exorcisms.
Yes. These deliverance ministries claim they are literally curing things like severe schizophrenia, just breaking chains through spiritual authority. And it's not just fringe groups. The Vatican actively supports and trains people in exorcisms.
And the symptoms they document are terrifying.
Absolutely terrifying. They mention extraordinary strength. The sources talked about a 110-pound woman easily throwing multiple grown men across a room.
And levitation. Multiple witnesses reporting people levitating.
And the exorcists claim these entities feed on inner psychological wounds, like trauma or deep resentment.
But then you move from human possession to the physical landscape. Look at the American West.
Oh, you mean Devil's Tower in Wyoming?
Yeah. It's this massive 900-foot volcanic anomaly just sticking straight out of the plains.
It looks so alien.
It does. Native American tribes see it as a sacred altar for divine inspiration. But Hollywood used it as the UFO landing site in Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
Because it just feels inherently otherworldly.
Right. Is it just geology we don't fully understand? Or is there something more? The early settlers definitely felt a dark presence, which is why they named it Devil's Tower.
And then there's a folklore like deep in the New Jersey Pine Barrens, the legend of the Jersey Devil.
The Mother Leeds story.
Yeah, born in 1735, supposedly her 13th child that turned into this horrific chimera horse head, bat wings, bird legs.
Which sounds completely ridiculous.
It sounds like a campfire story, but then you read that notable historical figures like Commodore Stephen Decatur claim to have seen it. He supposedly shot a cannonball directly at it.
Which is wild.
And in 1909, there was a mass panic that was so intense, they literally shut down schools and trolley cars across the state because people thought this demon was hunting them.
It paralyzed the region.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. When we talk about a 110-pound woman throwing men, or levitation, are we actually looking at something breaking the laws of gravity and physics? Or are these phenomena psychological manifestations of those inner wounds the exorcist mentioned? Mass hysteria can make people see some crazy things.
Well, whether it's an intense psychological breakdown during an exorcism, an unexplainable rock formation in Wyoming, or a winged creature shutting down public transit, humanity has a default setting.
What do you mean?
We default to naming the terrifying, unexplainable corners of our reality the devil. It's how we categorize the unknown.
Oh, so we give our fears a name so we can wrap our heads around them.
Exactly.
That makes a lot of sense. Which brings us to the final piece of this deep dive. If we have these vastly different groups, some seeing literal demons, others seeing psychological metaphors, how do they coexist in a world filled with both light and dark?
Surprisingly, both sides actually desire pluralism.
Really? They want to share the space.
Yeah. They both want a society where different beliefs can freely share the public square without government interference.
I guess a perfect microcosm for that tension is Halloween. How do these two totally opposing groups handle a holiday that is literally dedicated to the dark?
For the modern Satanists, it's a high Sabbath.
Like their biggest holiday.
Right. It's a time to mark the passage of time, to indulge, and to playfully face their fears.
And for Christians, it's viewed way more cautiously.
Much more. Some completely avoid it, viewing it as a legitimately demonic day.
But others actively participate, right?
Yes. Many choose to, quote, march into the darkness and bring light.
Oh, like doing trunk or treats in church parking lots?
Exactly. Taking a night of fear and turning it into a safe community event.
I think about that a lot. I mean, think about how you treat those you profoundly disagree with. Do you scorch the earth, or do you find a way to coexist like these two groups are trying to do?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, despite having wildly different dogmas, both groups actually emphasize personal accountability.
Right. Taking responsibility for your actions.
And righting wrongs. They both share this deep, fundamental human need to make sense of life, to understand death, and to navigate morality.
It really is the same human struggle, just wearing different clothes. So to recap this massive journey we've been on, we started on the philosophical battleground of God versus Satan.
Debating whether authority is a cage or a diving suit keeping you alive.
Then we looked at the origins of morality, the problem of evil, and traveled to the literal ancient valley of Hinnom where the concept of hell was born.
And finally, we explored those modern claims of physical evil, from exorcisms to the Jersey Devil.
It's a lot to process, but whether you view Satan as just a literary symbol of rebellion or as a literal physical force of evil moving through the world, these ancient concepts are still intensely shaping our modern laws. They shape our culture, and they dictate how we view our own personal freedom today.
They absolutely do.
So I want to leave you with a final provocative thought, something we haven't really touched on yet.
Okay, let's hear it.
If humans had never conceptualized the idea of a devil or a literal fiery hell, would we have naturally just found another way to externalize the darkness inside ourselves?
Oh, like inventing another scapegoat.
Exactly. Or, without a monster to point our fingers at, would we finally be forced to take full, unflinching responsibility for our own inner demons?
Wow. That's a heavy question to walk away with.
It really is. It changes how you look in the mirror. Well, that's all for today. Keep thinking deeper, and we'll see you next time.